It's great to be here. I know it's a bit of a cliche to say that it's a privilege, but it genuinely is. I'm delighted to be here. So I want to kind of go over a few things just to kind of set the scene here for us in terms of bridging the gap between ecology and economy, which is so important. So I'll be using the term nature quite a lot, even though, you know, they're kind of interchangeable terms. Nature refers to not just the living elements, but also the non-living elements. So our soils, our sands, our mountains, our oceans, and obviously biodiversity then is the living side of that. So you all know very well at this point what it is. So I'll skip on to the next slide. I think it's a mistake to talk about biodiversity loss and not talk about climate change at the same time, because businesses are more active around climate change, but they're one and the same issue. And climate change is here, there's no avoiding it. We're in the middle of it now. And we're in a mode of adapting and mitigating to the impacts of climate change. And nature is our greatest ally. And she has all the tools in her tool belt that we need to deal with these impacts. But we're systematically destroying her ability to provide for us and to protect us from these impacts. Biodiversity loss is, it decreases our resilience to these impacts of climate change, and climate change is a massive driver. So you can see that interplay between biodiversity loss and climate change, and they have to be talked about together, and they have to be dealt with simultaneously. So in terms of this presentation, I really want to draw your attention to two terms: impacts and dependencies. Business impacts, this will be a concept that you've already been introduced to, the drivers of biodiversity loss. I know there was social media about it this week, dealing with each of these individually. And we need to look at how these drivers of biodiversity loss, how industry puts additional pressures on those drivers, significant pressures, key pressures, that amplify the effects. Pollution, you know, solid, liquid, waste pollution, all of the stuff that goes to landfill. Invasive species, either introduced on purpose through, you know, ornamental plants, or by accident through our globalized market and the movement of goods across the planet. Ecosystem conversion, how we change the way we use our land and strip away the wildness. Climate change, we know how that affects biodiversity now. We know that we've lost 50% of the Great Barrier Reef because of ocean acidification and warming. And we know about the forest fires. And the exploitation, or rather the over-exploitation of our natural resources. And industry is a massive driver of all of this because of such a demand for stuff. And now dependencies. So this is about nature's contribution to people, as we have heard, I think, a few times now. And this is a really nice visual if you haven't seen it before. It kind of lists all of our ecosystem services and categorizes them into different sections. So the provisioning element, so all the stuff we get from nature, food and raw materials, all the way through those ecosystem services like pollination and recycling and you know, the tourism side of things. So you can see them there. And this nice quote from Business for Nature talks about what is the business case for investing in nature? Why should we invest in nature? Because it fundamentally underpins everything, our prosperity, our well-being. We derive economic value from nature. That's where wealth has come from. And again, nature increases our resilience to climate change. So the real message here is that we live in a connected world and a connected global economy. And every single piece of that economy is underpinned by nature. We have extracted, harvested, and stripped away all of nature's assets, and we have created immense value from that. From each part of the value chain all the way to the top of these companies that have so much wealth. And it doesn't get cycled back into the original place from which they derive the value. In fact, there's a study that's as yet unpublished that was done by EU Commission's DG Research and the European Investment Bank that assessed access to finance for nature-based solutions and nature restoration and found that 92% of finance is coming from public money. So that private sector funding is not being mobilised towards nature restoration, and that is something that needs to change. So I'm working on the platform, the Business and Biodiversity Ireland platform, and what we're trying to do is to encourage and incentivise Irish businesses to assess those impacts. Understand your impacts, understand the direct impact that you're having on nature through either your own operations or those through your value chain for which you're creating a demand for. Understand your dependencies, because that translates to risk. And mobilise funding towards the restoration of nature. This is one of the objectives of the previous National Biodiversity Action Plan, and our overall mission is to empower Irish businesses to bring nature into their decision making at every level, not just your sustainability team, but your procurement team, your finance team. Everybody needs to have nature woven into your thought process and your decision making, and that's the aim. Now, traditionally, I think you'll be familiar with a lot of this in terms of business actions. And we hear a lot about wildflower meadows and bug hotels and beehives on the roof. That's not what we're talking about here. The conversation has moved on from these kinds of actions. And the next graphic comes from the science-based targets for nature. And if you want to think about it like a food pyramid, the vegetables there are at the bottom. Avoidance of harm. That is the first thing that we need to do. There's no point in destroying nature over here and restoring it over there. That's not nature positive. That is still, at best, nature neutral. So we want businesses to know, how are you harming the environment? How are you harming, what ecological damage are you causing through your activities or those activities in your value chain? And how can you avoid it? How can you pivot away from it or transition away from it? And then, if you can't completely eliminate it, try and reduce it. And then the chocolate part of the food pyramid is what we're more used to seeing, what companies tend to talk about, is the nature restoration and regeneration. And it is incredibly important, but it's not the first thing you should be doing. So we talk about this term nature positive. We talk about this in terms of it's the net zero equivalent for biodiversity. So this is what companies are striving to become, or what we want them, what we need them to become, is nature positive. And what does that mean? Well, it's essentially your actions and activities, both directly and indirectly through your value chain, because that's so important. Most of the damage is happening in the value chain. And redirecting all your financial, not all, but a lot of your financial resources towards investing in restoration and protection. Because without that, we don't have the rest of the value chain and all the value that we created on the wealth and the prosperity without the fundamental ingredients that nature provides us. So how do we do this? This is the big question. This is us at the bottom of the mountain trying to figure out our way up. Business for Nature is a global organisation that have developed this methodology, and it's actually a culmination of a number of different methodologies that all kind of follow the same logic, and it's this: assess, commit, transform, and you'll notice that the first letters of those words spell ACT. Assessment of your impacts and dependencies. Full understanding of those impacts and dependencies. And knowing where the risks are. And you can't develop a meaningful biodiversity strategy without knowing that information. Understanding materiality, what's important and meaningful to your business. Knowing about your value chain. It's difficult, but it doesn't mean you shouldn't do it. So ask those questions, inquire. What's happening in your value chain? And where are you investing your money, your pensions? That's a really basic question to ask, and you can find out so much information by just inquiring where your money's invested. Then commitments, through using something like the science-based targets. Data-driven, measurable. They're things that are difficult in biodiversity, but it doesn't mean we shouldn't do it. We need more businesses to try so we can generate a wealth of information to use and share. And then the transformation of your business model, the evolution of your business model towards nature positive, redesigning your products for circularity, for a circular economy, reducing the waste, zero waste to landfill, zero deforestation. If you're using palm oil is in everything. Stock cubes, lipstick, it's everywhere. And if it doesn't say that it was responsibly sourced on the packaging, it means that it was irresponsibly sourced, which means some part of the rainforest was cut down to make way for those palm trees. So in the platform, we are trying to accelerate action in Ireland. So over the past year, we have done a lot of bilaterals with business. We've had some workshops with various stakeholders to understand what are the needs, what are the challenges. And education and awareness is a massive part of that. Businesses just don't really know what to do. So that is part of our remit, is to bridge that gap, to help educate business. And it's difficult. I know, I've run an SME. This would have been like low on my list of priorities, and I love nature. But you leave it at the door when you're firefighting, and SMEs are 98% of our economy. And yet, it will be difficult for us to empower them to take action without appropriate regulation, and appropriate support, and appropriate education for them. We're looking at creating a rating or a scoring system. That sounds great, but it's very complex. And we need to understand how we can do that well, so we can score businesses based on how they are dealing with their pressures that they're putting on those drivers to biodiversity loss. And then we're looking to create a portfolio of investment-ready nature restoration projects, because there's businesses out there that have money, but they don't know what to do with it. So we want to make that movement of private funding easier and funnel it into investment-ready projects. And bring different sections of the community together, so community groups and NGOs, and have people working together, because that's actually a really key part of getting out of this mess, is not doing it in isolation or in separation or in silos, is coming together and leaving competition at the door. So we're going to COP15, which is great, and we're really looking forward to it. It's the royal we, it's just me really. But Minister Malcolm Noonan will be there. And I'll be really engaged in the business forum there and trying to understand what's next for business and biodiversity and bring that back to Ireland and inject it into our platform. But one of the things, and it's a video that I hope will work in a moment, that the business community and the NGOs that are working in this space are hoping is this mandatory disclosure of nature-related risks from business, so that they tell us what their impacts are and what their dependencies are. And they tell us what they're doing about it. Because we as consumers create demand, and that demand creates markets and economies. And we need to make better choices, right? But we don't have the information to make better choices, to drive a more sustainable market and more sustainable products, more nature-positive products. So businesses need to make that information available to us. So I will hopefully be able to share this video just to give you a little flavour of hopefully what will come out of COP15. It might not work. Try it again. End of slideshow. It's only a short one, but it's good to see
if we can get it going. I'm afraid not.
No?
No.
But it basically just talks about all of these big multinationals that are coming together and demanding regulation. And they just want to be told what to do. They want guidelines. And it's a big campaign for governments around the world to make mandatory assessment and disclosure a responsibility of business. So I'll leave it there. Thanks so much.